what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I am your host, Cody Goodwin, here to talk some Tide hoops today. Alabama 19-3 overall, 8-1 in SEC play. They are midway through the conference schedule. They're going to return to action on Saturday against Arkansas in Fayetteville, another big road game. All remaining 9 conference games for the Crimson Tide, quad one opportunities. Going to be a tough back half of the conference schedule. But because we're midway through the SEC schedule, I thought now was a good time to kind of take a step back, do a reset, and kind of take stock of where the Alabama men's basketball program is at. So for today's show, brought on Isaac Trotter, good buddy, who is a national college basketball reporter for 24/7 and CBS Sports. He has a great basketball mind, really good when it comes to X's and O's and just kind of how teams fit and play with each other. Brought on Isaac to discuss, what he likes, what he doesn't like, what he's enjoyed, what surprised him about Alabama. 22 games into this season. They're ranked number 3 in the country. They are leading the nation in raw scoring. They are top 3 overall, top 5 overall in offensive efficiency by KenPom. Also have a top 50 defense overall, at least defensive efficiency by KenPom. So really, really good basketball team. I don't need to tell you guys that, but bringing on a guy like Isaac Trotter was able to pick his brain a little bit about Alabama to this point in the season, and then also what he's looking forward to through the remainder of the season, not just the remainder of the regular season, but there's also the SEC tournament as well as the NCAA tournament on the back half of that. It was a great conversation. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. We are going to go to Isaac now. As promised, back on Roll Pod for the second time. I'm not sure the last time an Alabama-centric podcast had a national college basketball writer on twice in the same season, but that's kind of where we are with the Alabama Crimson Tide. Joining me now, Isaac Trotter, national basketball reporter for CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports. Going to talk a little bit of Tide hoops. They are halfway through the SEC schedule. They have a gauntlet coming up on the other half of this mini bye that they had this week, starting with the road game against Arkansas tomorrow. We're recording this on Friday morning. They play Saturday evening in Fayetteville. Before we really dive into Alabama, Isaac, man, how are you? How is this college basketball season treating you, man?
Well, it's a blur, right? The updated schedules means there's a new basketball game every night. If you ask my wife, she'd be like, "How many basketball games do you have to watch this week?" Like that's kind of life for me right now. There's a lot of games going on, but it's really, really fun, and it's cool when the SEC, like you say things in the preseason, like, man, I think the SEC is better than the Big 12, and then that starts to come to fruition. It's helpful when we can get a couple of those preseason takes right.
The SEC, man, it's been kind of fun. Obviously, we focus a lot more on Alabama on this show, but like getting to see them go on the road against Kentucky, having to pay attention to what Auburn's doing because of some of Nate Oates' post-game comments after every single game. Tennessee's obviously doing the thing they're doing. Does it surprise you, I guess, a little bit that as we're now halfway through the SEC slate, that Alabama and Auburn have kind of it's not a huge gap, right? And there's a lot of games still left to be played, especially for Alabama, and we'll get into that, but they're the only 2 teams that don't have, I think, 3 losses. Like it's Auburn, it's Alabama, and then I think everybody else has 3 or 4 losses at least. Like, does that surprise you at all a little bit now that we're at this juncture of the season?
Yeah, a little bit. I think they've been a tad fortunate with their conference schedule early, right? But you don't make the schedule, right? You play who's in front of you, stuff like that. So I think I was looking at KenPom, like Auburn has the 15th rated conference strength of schedule, and then Alabama is 16th. So I think making a little bit of separation is actually what title contenders are supposed to do. This is like the closest, I think. Both of these teams are probably the most well-rounded teams in the league with the fewest flaws overall. Maybe you throw Florida in that mix as well. But like at this point, I think they've both done what they need to do. And this back half of the schedule is about like, it's going to be a big time proving test because like you said, like the best part about like this league is that like games change so quickly because like, if you asked about like a road game at Arkansas a week or 2 ago, you'd be like, well, that's a dub. And then like 3 days later, it's like, oh, this is going to be a little bit of a different challenge after what they've done the last couple of weeks. And so that's why, again, like this is your schedule. It's in front of you. You play who's in front of you. And kudos to Alabama and Auburn for taking care of business for the most part.
We're not going to touch too much on the Iron Bowl on this show, at least. We'll probably get to that later because they do play twice over the next month and some change. I think some of us are hoping that potentially they play 4 times over the next couple of months. We'll see if that ultimately comes to fruition. But we're here to talk about the Tide. 19-3 overall, 8-1 in SEC play, midway through their SEC schedule. They lead the nation in raw scoring, just over 90 points a game. They are, I believe, at last check, number 3 in offensive efficiency by KenPom. They are number 40 in defensive efficiency. They are largely projected to be a 1 seed by most NCAA tournament projections right now. But the second half of the SEC slate coming up, all remaining 9 games are quad 1 games for this Alabama team. As Isaac, I want to start here. What are just kind of some general takeaways? What have you thought about the way Alabama's been playing so far this season?
I think they're really battle tested. The things that they've been doing on the road is super impressive, right? Like their collection of road wins, if they end up getting a number 1 seed, I think is going to be the differentiator, because it's like you cannot find many teams that have beaten Kentucky on the road. They've beaten Mississippi State on the road, Texas A&M on the road, like the things that Carolina on the road, like that. These types of road wins are pretty impressive. But I think the willingness to change and evolve as this roster is kind of, with the injuries that they've had, Latrell Wrightsell's going down, like getting Chris Youngblood back, mixing him in, like they've changed a lot. And, one piece I was just working on this week is about, like we've seen a big trend of teams that have like a low volume shooting point guard with a non-shooting 5. There's been some real issues with them. Carolina's probably a big one, but Indiana is a huge one as well. Like they kind of try to do that. And it's been really hard for teams to create good offense with that. On paper, Alabama kind of checks that box off when Philon is on the floor with Cliff Omorui. And so like the fact that like they've been willing to change that and get Youngblood in the game and let Sears run the show at the 1 a little bit, I think has been good self-scouting of like understanding like we can't have a non-shooting 5 and a low-volume shooting point guard on the floor at the same time. It just, the offense, we have to be elite offensively, and we can get that with other parts. And Youngblood kind of coming into his own is really cool because, like, I mean, when you had me on early, I was pumping the drum on him big time. I thought he had a chance to be maybe their second best player. And now he's really starting to round into form and giving them that perimeter pop in that shooting that this roster like really needed. His emergence is kind of throws gas on this fire, I think.
Took a minute for Youngblood, one, to just, get back playing, right? He had that preseason injury, but since he's been back, he's kind of slowly eased his way back in. And then against Mississippi State is when he truly popped, right? 23 points, 7 of 10 from beyond the arc. But even then, like he had performances like against LSU, for example, 13-5, right? Double-digit points in what looks like, 6 games, but each of the last 3, he's been able to kind of be, another, I guess, scoring option for this offense. It's been really fun to kind of see him come into his own. I wanted to circle back to a point that you had made earlier about this team's ability to play really, really well on the road, because it seemed like last year there were times, especially later in the season, when you kind of understood the team's identity and they knew where they were good, they knew where they weren't. But one of the things that they really struggled with last year, and we saw this a lot more on the road than we did at home because they always tend to play well at Coleman, they would go on the road, they would effectively get punched in the face and just kind of go down, right? We saw that when they went to Knoxville. We saw that when they went to Auburn. We saw that when they went to Florida. We saw it again, SEC tournament, when they played Florida in the quarterfinal round. Like Florida just kind of came out, popped them in the chin, and they went down. This year's team doesn't seem to have that. They seem to find a way to punch back. What is it about this team that has maybe allowed them to, I don't know, play tougher? Like they just seem like they're a more, not just physically tougher because of Cliff and the emergence of Sherelle and just all these guys maybe second year in the program, but just mentally, they seem like they are much more locked in this year than they were at points last year.
Yeah, no, I think it kind of goes to your leaders being around the program a little bit more, right? Like Sears has been here for a few years. Like Nelson's been here for a couple years. So that certainly helps with it. But I also just think from an X and O's perspective, like they just make teams play their way. And I think that really helps them on the road because like they make teams uncomfortable, whether they're at home or on the road, because of the spacing and the tempo that they play with. Like like it's just so hard to simulate that. And so I think when you're on the road and you need to get easy buckets and you need to find a way to get the crowd out of it and you need to create good shots, like Bama does a lot of those things. And so that's a way to, like we can talk about toughness. And I agree. Like Mo Diabate, I think, has given them some real moments this year, especially like with his hard hat plays, like the ability just to get loose balls and deflections and be in the right place at the right time and compete. Philon, I think, does a lot of those things as well, just being like a complete dog. And so like you need some of those things too. But I do genuinely think like that offensive ability to like generate good shots, regardless of who we're playing with, and make them play your way has certainly helped them on the road. And too, like, I do think that non-conference schedule certainly helps. It's like, all right, we've played at Purdue. Like that's like one of the toughest environments to play in. Like we've played at Carolina. Like we've done all of these things. Like this they're not going to see something now in the SEC that they haven't necessarily seen this year, maybe outside of like an Auburn and Florida, who are, those tier 1 national title contenders.
100%. Yeah. We've talked a lot about just the good things that Alabama has been doing this year. What else have you liked about what you've seen from them through the first few months of the season?
Yeah, I think you nailed it a little bit with the Sherrell emergence has been interesting. I think
that dude can move, man.
He can really move. And, I like the little, like the floor spacing that they get with him on the floor. It gives him a little bit of a different look, also like, I think that like the meat and potatoes part of this team has been pretty impressive with how they punk teams on the glass for the most part. Like that's something that I thought they could do when you looked at their like personnel, but like I wasn't sure if it would be like this much of a strength. And they've been killing teams on the glass. So I think we think about Alabama, it's like pace and space and threes and all of this like, fun, advanced offensive stuff. But like at the end of the day, like they are like punking teams on the glass. And I think that like that meat and potatoes mixed along with some of like the finesse and speed and fun and like the parts of this offense kind of gives them a little bit of staying power as well. So I think that like their physicality is something that I had questions about, especially at that 4 spot with like Jaron Stevenson and Grant Nelson. Like, are they going to be physical all the time? At times, I think it's been a little bit better lately. And Cliff has helped with that, and Mo has helped with that, and Reed helps with that too, and Diabate obviously. So like their physicality is something that I think is a little bit of the secret sauce behind like why they're one of the top teams in the country.
Yeah, and it just goes back to that idea that just this seems like not just a mentally tougher team, but also a physically tougher team. And when you're able to pair those two things together, a lot of really good things happen. I did want to ask you also another transfer, Aiden Holloway. Did you expect him to be as good or as efficient as he's been so far this season? There are times when he's the best player on the floor for Alabama, depending on who they're playing and how they're shooting.
So I kind of was in a little bit of an oscillation period with Holloway because I was really high on him last year heading into Auburn, and then it just didn't really go well. And so this year I was like, okay, I think he's going to bounce back, but I didn't want to be like too high on him again. But he has certainly started to find like his groove. And I think this scheme and system, that's not a shot at Auburn at all, but I think what they're asking him to do makes a lot more sense. He's playing with great pace. I think there are times where I wish he would shoot even more. Like he has an opportunity to, like when he's super aggressive, like, and when he's hunting his shot, things go well. But, the other part about his game too, that's been really fascinating to me is like the turnover rate stayed pretty low for the most part. So he's done a good job of not turning it over a ton, which is tough in the SEC when there's just so much length and athleticism. And, he's added parts to his game. He's taking more twos this year. Last year, I think he shot like 33% on twos, and it was like nothing at the rim. This year, he's really changed that part of his game. So the staff helping him and him improving, like I didn't expect him to be this good from two. I really didn't. I think he's over 61% from twos this year and 65% on twos in SEC play. If you told me that last year, I would not have believed you, because that was a huge struggle of his game, and he looked really out of sorts. So you're right. Like there have been moments where he looks ridiculously good, and they're like the fact that they can bench Mark Sears and play Holloway, like very few teams can bench a preseason All-American like that and just completely get away with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, you brought it up, the whole Mark Sears thing, right? Like that was a big talking point. Like that's probably one of the few times when Alabama basketball kind of overtook Alabama football, I guess, like in the sports talk space down south. What did you make of that move, of Oates' response to it, of Sears' response to it, right, when he was able to come back the next game and he seems like he has hit his stride a little bit? What did you make about that coaching tactic, that move that Nate Oates employed?
Well, I went and watched the film of that like first half, and it was not pretty. Like defensively, like it was not good. And I think Mark would probably agree with that. Like he was missing, like he was the low man on multiple pick and rolls that he just was like standing and watching for a couple lobs. There was a play late in the first half where he took a pretty tough hit. Maybe he got fouled, he took a shot to the head, but he was slow to get back and gave up a transition three. And like that, like those types of plays for a team like this can't happen. Now, here's the other part of this. Would they have been able to do that if it was anybody but LSU? Like, I wonder if there was a different conversation about this where it's like, Oates, maybe he was frustrated, and maybe Holloway's playing well, and they were able to get that going, and that's all great. But like, was this also a situation of like, it's LSU, we probably have a chance to take care of business even without it? But veterans bounce back. I thought it was impressive, like what Oates said about him, like that Monday afterward, that first practice was really, really good. And I think Mark, like when I talked to him at the combine, like he talked about his defense openly. He was like, I have to be better on that end. Like I just have to be. And this team cannot win the title without him being really engaged and locked in defensively, because defense is only as strong as its weakest link. And if teams are constantly going at Mark and he's not up to the challenge, he's making mistakes off the ball and letting his offense dictate his defense, like that can't happen. And so I think it was a pretty impressive, like what he's done lately. And I think it's going to be a nothing burger. Like it just is what it was in that moment. And we're on to the next. And it's very NBA like everything else in this program, where it's like, if you watch the NBA, like you see guys get benched all the time when it's just not a good night for them or not the right matchup. And it doesn't mean anything long-term, because there's 82 of the games and they're right back in there the next one. And here we go. And so I think that's kind of my reaction to it. And I think he bounced back. And I really genuinely don't think we'll see that happen ever again.
Yeah, bounced back against Mississippi State, 17 points, 9 assists, 6 rebounds. Then against Georgia, 26 and 5. Really good response there from Mark Sears. On the flip side, what has maybe surprised you in a not so good way? Like what have you not liked, or what maybe worries you after watching 22 games of this Alabama team?
I think there's like moments, I think, where like sometimes they have a few too many lineups with small guards on the floor. And I wonder how high your ceiling defensively can be when you have two smalls on the floor at the same time. Like that's maybe a small concern for me. I think there's still some roller coaster vibes at times with Grant Nelson, that like it just kind of is what it is. You kind of signed up for it. And then I also like am curious to see like just how like the shooting evolves, because like there are going to be times where I think like they have lineups where it feels like they don't have enough shooting on the floor, which just feels weird with Alabama. And it's like really reliant on like Sears to make threes and Youngblood to make threes. So I'm just curious, just like how like the evolvement of this offense continues to grow, because like they've kind of shuffled guys in and out like of the lineup. Like sometimes like it felt like Phylon at pockets in non-conference play was their best player, and now he's like playing 13 minutes a game. And so it's like, how do we continually to like press the right buttons moving forward, and can we find ways to get enough shooting on the floor without sacrificing some of those like that rebounding effort of it that we have, like that extra pop that we have. So those are some of the like the mild concerns, but for the most part, like even with a team that like has shot a lot of threes and hasn't necessarily made a ton, I think they're like top 170 in offense. I'm pulling up their SEC numbers right now. So like in SEC play, they're shooting 37% from three. That's really impressive. Like that's totally fine and probably more of the norm of what you'd expect. If that number sticks, this team can be the top offense in the country. Just when you max like the transition, the speed, the rebounding, the good shots they create, and then they're shooting 36% from three. That's, I think, the recipe for them to win the title.
The 3-point shooting thing struggled early on, especially in non-conference, but it seems like they have figured it out in conference play. Is that just a matter of maybe guys finding their roles, of maybe just kind of reverting back to the mean of how good this team is, filled with shooters? Or what do you think is the cause of maybe the uptick of just being able to shoot the ball better?
Change lineups as well, right? Like they've changed, getting more of the lineups. I think that's kind of why Jaren has earned a lot more run, because they do still trust him to make shots compared to more like a Phylon. Like they trust Jaren's catch and shoot abilities more. Also, 3-point variance just kind of ticking back on their side is a real thing. like I think early in the season, like I think they were shooting like 31% on transition threes at one point. Like that's just a pretty low number. Like transition threes is like the shot that all offenses are trying to create, because I think the average median average on that shot for college basketball teams this year has been like 36 or 37% on transition threes, and Alabama was 6% below average, and we thought that team would potentially be like near the top, maybe number 2 like type of deal, like on transition threes. So like I need to dig into the numbers from SEC play, but I'm pretty sure that transition 3 number has started to level off a little bit, like kind of expect what we expected them, kind of reverting to the mean a little bit. So I think they were creating good shots all along, but the tweaked lineups, getting Youngblood in there, getting Sears in there, like with more confidence, and those transition threes starting to fall now, have like kind of contributed to this group, being a little bit more what we expected in that 36% range from downtown.
I kind of thought that was one of those things where it's like, okay, they're struggling now, but eventually they'll start to hit. And it's, just kind of one of those things where it's almost like they're working their way into that point of the season. And now that they've hit SEC play, obviously the, stakes are a little bit higher because I know Nate really, really wants to win a conference title, both regular season and tournament title. So matter of just getting those guys just kind of more focused, I guess. I don't even know if that's the right word. The thing that he told us is that like, we just need the right guys shooting, and just those guys need to pull the trigger all the time. Like he gets on guys about passing up shots. Like you mentioned with Holloway, like he needs to keep shooting. Like Holloway has even said in the few times that we've talked to him that, Nate tells me to shoot the ball all the time. And when I pass up open looks, he puts me on the bench. So it's like, I'm sure it's a combination of things, but it's just kind of funny to see it just kind of trend upward after just such a weird start.
And that's a great point about like who is shooting them is really important too. Cause there's times where it's like Sherelle, like, yeah, he made a couple against Georgia, but then there's other times where it's like, do we really need you taking those? Like he's earned it, I guess. But like same thing with like Reed, like, and maybe like even Mo at times as well too. So it's like, just trying to find ways to like funnel the ball into our best shooters' hands. And I think, teams are going to continue to try to dork Grant Nelson, right? Like that's a real thing. They just sag off of him. Illinois tried that. He made him pay, but then didn't make a three for like a month after that. Like it kind of is what it is. Like teams are going to try to do that, but they just have to do a good job of when they do that to non-shooters, just continuing to use them as screeners, like all of those different little nuances to generate open shots so that the right guys are taking threes. Because when the right guys do, when it's Chris and it's Mark and it's Holloway, like good things will probably end up happening.
Yeah. The point on Sherelle, though, like Nate has said, he's like a 40% 3-point shooter, like in practice. Like that's how, they use their Bamalytics. And that's, he's like, hey, like he's got the green light if he's open and he's available to do it. So, which is kind of funny for, a guy who's, 6'11", 240 pounds. And I mean, not 6'11", guys who are 6'11", 240 probably can't move like Aiden Sherelle can. But it was just kind of funny to hear that just like, oh yeah, like, okay. So like, I don't know.
He's earned it. No, I totally, I believe Nate when they say that. Like, I just don't think that he would like turn the green light off for guys. Like I bet they have to earn it. And like, that's the frustrating part. Cause like, has Grant earned that? I don't know. We have a pretty long sample size of threes not going in for him. And so it's just like that balancing act of, yeah, we need you to take some to just alleviate the defensive pressure a little bit, but like maybe not 6, type of deal.
Well, the funny point about Grant is that he not a great 3-point shooter, but when it's 5 minutes remaining in the second half in a very tight game, like that dude is shooting like 50% from deep. Like for whatever reason, he's got the clutch gene. Like we saw it against Mississippi State. I think we saw it again against LSU. Like he may go like 2 for 6 or 1 for 5 or whatever, but like the one he hits is usually very crucially important at a big time in the game.
It counts twice as much type of deal. Yeah, it's like that or 1.5 times as much. No, I totally see what you're saying. Where it's just like some guys are just wired like that. Like I will say, like that was a thing in the tournament last year. You kind of like turned the light switch on and
against UNC,
yeah, and UConn, like he had a really good game against UConn too. It's like it just feels like there's times where I watch Grant and he just like it's almost like nothing is happening up top. It's like he looks the exact same whether it's in the opening tip or whether it's 3 minutes to go and. That's probably a reason why those shots go in. When I played in games like that, I knew you could probably tell in my face if it was a crunch time moment.
Does the turnover thing, because it's a thing, right? They've had 2 games where they've had 20 plus turnovers this season. They seem to be at times just kind of careless with the ball. Like the way that I've described it is like sometimes they just have a couple of passes where it's like, dude, where the hell were you going with that ball? Like it just looked like they were throwing it to the other team. I know that they play a ton of possessions per game. And when it comes to efficiency, even with all the turnovers, they are still a very, very good team. Does the turnover thing worry you at all? Because that's a thing when I look at what can undo this team in 40 minutes in March, it would be a combination of maybe a little bit lackluster rebounding performance, turning the ball over, and not shooting well from beyond the arc. Like, how much does that worry you about this team?
No, I think the turnover thing is a real thing. And I think that's like kind of why like they've tried to play some of those multiple point guard looks. Like you feel like you have extra ball handling on the floor, but like they're going to be really tested, I think, moving forward because like Auburn can turn you over. They play a little bit more of a passive defense, but they will turn you over at times. Like Florida, the same type of deal. Like their athleticism and physicality at the point of attack will turn you over. Missouri, same type of deal. They're very aggressive and going to try to turn you over as well. Like so Tennessee, obviously, like they will take the ball away from you and rip it away from you. So like, I think we're going to learn a lot more about this group moving forward. And I think it goes back to just not trying to do too much. Just move it, get it out of your hands, move it, and we'll find great shots. Because, Cliff is not somebody you're going to throw the ball to on the block. Like, this team is not going to play slow like that. They're not going to do a lot of booty ball like that and try to like post teams up and play mismatch hunting. I just don't think that's going to be their identity. But like the turnover battle, like if we're going to play 2-point guards at a time, like those turnovers, that high turnover rate just can't happen. Or like, why are we playing 2-point guards? You know what I mean? Like, that just doesn't make sense to me.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, you brought up LeBaron Philon. You were high on this dude in the preseason. Even early in the season, I was watching this dude, and I'm not a basketball expert. I'm not near the X's and O's junkie that you are, but even I could tell that this dude was a little different, right? Like, first couple of months, I think he was in double figures like 9 times. He was hunting a triple-double against Illinois, a top 25 team. Like, he looked the part. January, he kind of slowed down a little bit. You mentioned his usage and just the amount of minutes he's playing has dropped pretty, I don't want to say significantly, but he's only, playing maybe less than 15 minutes per game on average through SEC play. Is this a freshman wall thing, or what do you think is maybe leading to some of these struggles?
Well, yeah, the leash is obviously a little bit shorter, right? Because Youngblood's back. It's like we're chasing a title. Like, we can't like afford these type of mistakes. I think the freshman wall does make a little bit of sense. We're starting to see that with a couple guys like Kasparis Yakashonis at Illinois has kind of slowed down a little bit lately. There's been pockets where Ace Bailey at Rutgers has slowed down a little bit. Like, this freshman class is awesome, but like that doesn't mean that they're immune to having some of these struggles in non-conference play. But in conference play. But I also think it goes back to like a lot of teams are guarding him a little bit differently, where like the jumper, they don't totally respect it. They're loaded up on the drives. They've done a better job of like boxing him out because he's a really good offensive rebounder for a guard, stuff like that. So I think their teams are just kind of used to him a little bit. And so it's like a lot of freshmen kind of reach that stage where it's like, all right, like, what am I now? What? Like, what's my counter to the counter? Yeah. And so like, I think he's going to find it. I really do. Like, he's such a high IQ player. And they need him, I think, in order to like reach their ceiling. Their best version of Alabama probably includes Philon being the best version of himself. And so like, I think they're going to need him. It's like there was like times like against Kentucky where like he looked really poised, right? Like they were like, you're seeing him in the second half being able to get good shots. And I like the lineup when they go with Philon and Youngblood and Sears together. That wasn't a lineup they used a ton early, right when Youngblood got back. But I like that mix just because it's like it's a thick guard in Youngblood who can really shoot it paired with a smaller guard in Sears who can shoot it and drive it and gets a lot of paint touches, and another like string bean longer guard in Philon. It feels like that those three can like complement each other pretty well, and their net rating with those three on the floor together has been pretty good when they play them. So I think he'll find it. I really do. I just am curious to see like how long it'll take. Because that's what it's like. It's getting late early, and as we've learned, you can be a preseason All-American. That does not mean you're guaranteed to play on this team. Even if Philon, I might think he might end up being a first-round pick if things continue to go well eventually down the road. But like, it doesn't mean you're guaranteed to play on this team because they have championship aspirations and they got 8 guys, 9 guys, maybe 10 guys that probably would start for a lot of Division I teams.
And I think maybe the thing that hasn't worried me about the whole Philon hitting the freshman wall thing as much is the same reason maybe why Nate was comfortable putting Mark Sears on the bench, right? It's a very deep team. Like, you look at all the guards, right? Sears, Philon, Youngblood, Aiden Holloway's been playing really, really well, especially in SEC play. Like, there's a lot of different options that they can go to. So when a kid is struggling, it so happened to coincide with like Youngblood finding his stride, right? So it's not like they've really dropped off at all. And maybe that's why I'm not nearly as worried. I am curious to see if he's able to get it back, because I agree with you. Like, it's one thing to have the depth, but they're probably going to need the depth if they're going to want to make the run that they feel like that they can make in March.
Yeah, and like, I think we've seen a lot of examples of guys like finding their little pockets of the season where they can help you. And like you said, I think that was a great point. It's like, all right, like Philon's struggling, but here comes Youngblood. Like, there's going to be moments, I think, where like Philon steps up when maybe Holloway doesn't shoot 50% from 3 in SEC play the whole year. Like, maybe every jumper he takes doesn't go in. Like it feels like that's the rhyme and the reason, the ebbs and the flows of the season. And I do think defensively they're better when he's on the floor. They haven't been lately, and they do it. Nate does a really good job of like prioritizing lineups that work together and stuff like that. But I do think the best version of Alabama's defense is Philon on the floor, just because he's such a smart defender. But like, got to make shots. And I think that kind of goes back to like that, what I was saying earlier, like those teams where it's like you have one big who can't shoot threes and a point guard that doesn't shoot a lot of threes. I think there's a reason why like those offenses have struggled, and I think that might be correlated with why Feinlein's minutes have dropped a little bit in favor of Holloway, who could shoot the absolute cover off the ball.
Absolutely. Somebody had made the comment the other day while I think we were watching the Alabama-Mississippi State game. I'm kind of curious what you think about this. Aiden Holloway has almost a Steph Curry-like shot where it's the release on the way up, and also just the fact that he can pull that trigger from virtually anywhere. Do you agree with that? Like, that's once somebody pointed out to me, I couldn't not see it. And again, not a basketball expert, not a guy that's going to go dissect film and put them side by side, but like watching it, I was like, I kind of get the same feeling when I watch like Steph Curry highlights. What do you think?
It comes out clean. It comes out really clean. It's like it's very translatable. And like I think our recruiting guys labeled him as the best shooter in his recruiting class. Like, so this is not new at all. So I agree with you like that. And I even think back to last year at Alabama, like his first game against Baylor. Like when I was watching him, it's like, oh my gosh, like this kid's gonna tear up the league. Like he's just gonna tear. It comes out of his hands so quickly, and I think the gravity about it as well too. Like his teams are stressed about him when he has the ball. Teams are stressed when he gives it up, and they use him off the ball. I think they've done a nice job of kind of mixing his reps in both on the ball and off the ball to kind of create chaos and open up shots for everybody else. Even if he doesn't get an assist, he's just able to drag that defense just a little bit more and create space. So like it's a good evaluation. And I think it's like another sign about like how fit really does matter a lot. Like he's a really talented player. He could have easily been doing this for a lot of other teams, but the best version of him is here for Alabama. And I think he did a good job of finding the scheme that really fits his skill set best.
Looking ahead, we had mentioned this earlier, Alabama, 9 games remaining on the SEC schedule. All of them are quad one opportunities, starting with Saturday's game in Fayetteville against Arkansas, but they play Auburn twice. They get Kentucky back at home, on the road against both Tennessee and Missouri. They get Florida in Tuscaloosa, the season finale at Auburn. That could very well decide the SEC title. I'm curious, Isaac, what do you hope to see more of over this final stretch of SEC games from Alabama?
Yeah, I think it's like the 3-point rate and the 3-point percentage. Like those are the things that like I thought this group was going to be a shot making team. It wasn't for a while. Now it's started to turn around. Like if they can keep that going up down the stretch, I think that'll be really important. And I think like the narrative around them will start to change a little bit of like this team can actually shoot threes because I think we all knew they could, but like it just the numbers didn't indicate that in the early going. But I do think this week is huge. You know, I think Saturday on the road against Arkansas, like that Arkansas group without Boogie Bland has really changed their identity. Janelle Davis gets a little bit more usage. DJ Wagner's there. That's a big guard group. Like DJ is like a legit 6'4". Janelle is like a legit 6'4"-ish as well. Like they're physical and really athletic. So I think that their size, like how they handle big guards, is going to be tested coming up here soon, because right after that is Texas on the road as well, and that's Trey Johnson, and that's Kaluma, and that's Tremont Mark, those big guards. So like I'm curious just to see how they'll handle that, because again, like when you face Auburn, like their guards are all their handlers. Like Chad Baker-Mazar is a really big player. Like I think Alabama's like perimeter size is going to be tested down the stretch here, and we'll see, kind of how good defensively they can be, because like they got some absolutely like handful type of matchups coming up.
What maybe encourages you the most with looking at what Alabama's got coming up? Like what gives you hope that they can navigate this slate in a way to keep them in SEC contention?
I think they're going to be able to win the math against Arkansas by a wide margin. Like Arkansas does not take as many threes as Alabama generates. Arkansas likes to score in transition. Their half-court offense hasn't been terrific. So I think if Alabama can do a good job of just like, we're going to get better shots than you for 40 minutes, I think they have a chance to math that one into a win. And the same thing with Texas as well, too. Like Texas, like they play a lot of isolation, and they take a lot of contested jumpers. Taking contested jumpers against Alabama is really scary, because that just kind of fuels them in transition, gets them out running when they're good on the glass. So I think that they're in pretty good shape in these next two to take advantage of it on the road. And then the Auburn matchup, I'm just fascinated to see how this goes, because I still like think back to that early Purdue game when Trey Kaufman-Renn, like one-on-one, gave them so much trouble on the block. And they haven't necessarily had to see a guy like that in a minute. And I'm curious to see how Broome, like, is it one-on-one against Cliff, one-on-one against Grant, like whoever it is. I think Sherelle will get chances. Maybe Mo will get his shot to maybe the double, like stuff like that. Like there's going to be a lot of options there. But like that low post defense, like, are we going to get destroyed by a low post scorer again, like it was with Trey Kaufman Wren, or have we learned our lessons? Nate talked about, like, we haven't really guarded a lot of post ups in practice. Heading into that Auburn game, I think that's going to change a little bit, and we're going to start to see a little bit of a different look from them. And I'm curious to see if that's like the Achilles heel still of this team, or if they've kind of fixed one of those problems that presented itself early in the season.
Do you consider that? I guess the last question I had for you is what maybe worries you the most about this team moving forward? Is it a matchup like that? Is it the turnover thing? Like, what do you ultimately think could undo this team during this next stretch of games?
Yeah, I think it is that low post scorer that can just kind of barrel through teams at the bottom. Because like Ken Cliff pulled up one-on-one. I think that's like what they thought they were getting. And if he is that guy where he's like, just, we don't have to send a double, we'll make you beat us with twos, and he's going to be fine, like, contesting, and maybe Janai Broome scores 20, but it took him 22 shots. Like, I think that's what they were envisioning with him. I'm curious to see if that is the reality. And if it isn't, and Auburn's a tough matchup just because of their size inside and the way that they just abuse teams at the rim offensively and defensively, I think that could be a little bit scary when you get to March, because there's other teams out there who will try to do a lot of the same things, like Duke. If you saw Duke, they're going to try to do some of those things. Like, I think Florida is a team that could potentially try to do those things as well. Say you run into Gonzaga, that's what they're going to try to do as well, just those low posts, like Graham Ike post ups a lot. So there's some teams out there where if you're attacking Alabama, it's like we're going to just try to pound them inside and see if we can kind of barrel through that front line. And I'm curious to see if Cliff and Sherelle and the rest of that crew is kind of up to the challenge.
Isaac, I really appreciate you coming on again to talk some more Tide hoops. Where can folks find all of your work?
Yeah, you can read my stuff on cbssports.com or 247sports.com, and you can follow me on Twitter, Isaac_Trotter. And yeah, that's kind of where all my work is right now.
Yeah, I was going to say February. We've got another couple weeks left, and then it's like it's like March is like Christmas for guys in your line of work. We're almost there, man. Would you say we're a few weeks away from Selection Sunday?
Few weeks away from Selection Sunday, and then right after that the portal starts. So it's like, oh God, like welcome to the end. Like I'll be in my cave for the next 6 weeks. So it'll be fun though. Like I think this college basketball season's been terrific from just a pure like entertainment value standpoint, and I think we're shaping up for a huge March, and Bama's obviously a huge part of that as well.
Big thanks to my buddy Isaac Trotter. Again, go read his stuff. He writes nationally for CBS Sports, 247 Sports, a great basketball mind, as you guys just heard there. He writes about the SEC, I feel like, weekly. He has his eye on Alabama. Really just, he's a basketball fan like the rest of you guys, and it's really fun to bring him on, pick his brain about the Crimson Tide. Like I've always said, never going to claim to be a basketball junkie or expert myself, so it's great to have a guy like Isaac to come on and kind of give you that in-depth look from somebody who watches the game with maybe a little bit different eye than the rest of us. But hey, that's all we've got on today's show, guys. Really appreciate you tuning in. We will be back next week. I had a game scheduled for Mike, Alex, and I earlier this week, but then the Ryan Grubb news came down. So we're going to punt that game to early next week, probably somewhere in that Monday, Tuesday range, with some more pre-spring football conversation. You guys can look forward to that. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. You can get all of our great coverage on the Crimson Tide. And also, if you get a Bama 247 subscription, you can read all of Isaac's stuff on 247 Sports as well. A national basketball writer. He covers not only the Alabama and the SEC, but college basketball at large. And if you really enjoyed this show and the conversations that we had today, he literally writes that stuff multiple times a week. So if you want a Bama 247 subscription, it will help you read a lot more of Isaac's stuff as well. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. Talk to you all again soon.